people are relating to the music. You know, they're relating to the realness of it. They're relating to the freshness of it. You know, they're relating to the idea of a bunch of guys getting in a room and sweating and playing music, you know, from their heart, from their balls. You know what I mean? And hearing Sharon's voice and hearing, you know, the rawness of it and the realness of it and the passion of it, and you know, people that can play, people that have been touring together on the road for a long time and really can actually play the music, you know? And that's refreshing to people's ears right now. There's just not enough of it. We didn't say, let's start a record label and see if we can make some money. What we said is, let's play some music, you know what I mean? Let's make a record because we want to make a record, not because we were trying to figure out what would people buy, what would be popular, you know? And 15 years ago, we started making records. We were making 45s. We'd sell 200. We'd sell 300, you know? And we've been doing stuff the same way ever since, you know? We never really got distracted with, okay, well, people are trying to do this, or people are trying to do that, or what's going on in the music industry, or what's on the radio, or how can we sell more records. Our approach, you know, from the label side was always, you know, let's be true to ourselves. Let's make a record that we love. You know, if we make a record that we love and that we're proud of, that's a success. That's how we define success. And I think people respected that, and people that had, you know, similar taste in music and similar, you know, similar appreciation, you know, for good music and for real music, you know, they connected to that. They connected to it on a deep level, you know, as musically, but also even philosophically, you know, seeing an independent record label and people doing stuff on their own terms, their own way, people connect to that. You know, that's been a strength for us, you know, as far as where the artificiality of modern music came from. I mean, it came from corporations, you know, it came from Sony, it came from Warner Brothers, it came from Universal, you know, I mean, these EMI, these companies, you know, they're corporations, they're not music companies. They have nothing to do with music, and the decisions they make don't have to do with music, you know. What they do with their money, what they do with their promotion, none of it has to do with music. It all has to do with how they can make money, you know, and they put together these very strange business strategies for how to sell a huge pop record, you know. And it worked for a while. And they, you know, coming out of the 70s and into the 80s, even into the 90s, they figured out, okay, we have a Madonna record, we have a Nirvana record, we have, you know, these huge records they would do, and they'd sell millions and millions of them. And everything else, well, it didn't, you know, they would just kind of throw it by the wayside. But at some point, you know, the serpent started eating its own tail, as they could say, and the business model just stopped being sustainable, you know. And in the modern age with, you know, the internet and downloads and emailing tracks and copying tracks and all these, everybody's got, you know, tracks on their phone and everything. It's kind of the Wild West, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, people all over the world have, they have options, they have freedom. They don't just have to buy the, you know, the 2 records that are being stocked at the front of Walmart. They can go on the internet and they can go to iTunes or Amazon, or they can go, you know, if they have one, if they're lucky enough, they can go to their local record store. But, you know, on the internet, you can find anything, you know what I mean? And the record companies, they can't compete with that. I mean, the way their business is trying to force feed, you know, 12-year-old girls, you know, the latest group of models they hired to sing, you know, they put them together. You know, this is not, it isn't based on music, and that's why they're suffering now, you know, which is great. I love watching them squirm, you know. I mean, I hope they go out of business. I hope Sony goes out of business, Warner Brothers, all these major companies, man. They don't, you know, they're really, there's nothing sustainable about their model, and and they show no value to music, you know. The only thing they can think of when they start floundering, you know, instead of saying, wait a second, let's slow down, let's try to make some good music, let's try to make a great record. They think, well, how else can we sell this? How can we make it cheaper and faster and smaller, you know? How can we attach an MP3 to a can of Coke? You know, how can we give away one free with a Happy Meal? You know, that's all they think about. You know, like, can we find a 16-year-old singer that's got great big tits? You know, and she's blonde and she can be the face of the generation. We'll make a cartoon about her. That's what we'll do, and we'll put her on the Disney Channel. You know, I mean, they just have anything. They'll try anything other than music. You know, and when they do get to music, it's all formulaic. You know, all they think of is the only person they're going to give their budget to is the person who's going to do something exactly like what the last hit record was. And this is why music is stagnating, pop music. You know, this is why modern pop music doesn't sound any different than it did 30 years ago. I mean, think about what rhythm and blues sounded like. Think about what music sounded like in the 20s. Very different in the 30s. very different in the 40s. In the 50s, it was completely different. You know, if you hear a record from the 60s, you know it's from the 60s. You know, it's not from the 50s. You know, Little Willie John will sound different than you know, a James Brown record from '68. You hear it, you know the sound. You know, and then you listen to the '70s, and you listen to, you know, the Philadelphia sound, and, you know, all this other music, and Al Green and stuff. You hear the evolution of the sound. The music was aggressively, boldly changing. People had different, you know, were writing different kinds of songs, recording them differently, having different kinds of music. You know, all the way up into the '80s, things were getting different. And then the '80s, you know, they invented, you know, you got MIDI, you got digital recording, you got drum machines, you got samplers, and they got to that. And I said, you know, great, fine, that was a sound, you know, and it was new and it was fresh and it was exciting. But if you listen to R&B music from the '80s and from the '90s, you can't really tell the difference, you know. And if you listen to something from the '90s and the last 10 years, you definitely can't tell the difference, you know. I mean, if somebody played you a track you'd never heard before, and you had to tell them whether that was from '97 or 2007, there's no way to tell the difference, man. It's all the same thing, and that's because the music has been stagnating. You know, that's because everything's been formulaic. That's because these bullshit major labels, all they do is pay for the same thing over and over again. Oh, well, that record hit. Let's try to do another one like that, you know. And once in a while, once in a very, once every 5 years or so, a record will come along like the Buena Vista Social Club record, or what's her name, the Norah Jones record, or some record that wasn't supposed to succeed, you know? Some record that they expensed and they put it out on the side, and all of a sudden, people say, wait a second, we like that. That's good music. And they sell millions of them, and they can't figure it out, you know? Well, how did that work? How do they do that, you know? And they don't have the flexibility, they don't have the wherewithal to say, oh, wait a second, that's just good music. People are buying it because it's good music, you know? Their reaction to that is, oh, well, the Buena Vista Social Club record sounded great, it sold a lot. Let's make a whole bunch more records that sound exactly like that. You know, the Norah Jones record sound, who's going to be the next Norah Jones, you know? I mean, you don't think Norah Jones woke up in the morning and said, oh, I think I'll be the next Norah Jones? I mean, there are people, you know, they're original artists, you know, and there always have been. And this kind of philosophy by the major labels has stifled that, you know? And, you know, and the point is that there are great artists out there. There's great songs, there's fresh ideas, you know, there are great records being made. It's just not really being supported, you know, by the majors.
Like also, like you described like the concept of record companies. I think one concept I can see in Daptone is also like your band or the group of musicians that's surrounded around you. For example, together with Naomi Shelton, who we talked to, or Cliff Driver.
Yeah.
I know that there's a bass player around who used to play with James Brown.
Fred Thomas.
And then Sharon. So how is like the relationship, like African American musicians and also African American musicians that come from the late '60s, early '70s? Cliff Driver, even
Lee Fields, yeah. Well, there's I mean, at Daptone there's a very it's a very family-oriented business, you know. I mean, it's a bunch of people working together with love and respect, and people who know each other for a long time, people who care about each other. It's not, you know, it's not simply a business relationship, you know. It's not like we're just calling random people and saying we want you to come record for us. These are all people that we very slowly got to know for years. You know, every one of those people you mentioned, you know, I've been working with for 10 years, you know. Cliff Driver and Naomi Shelton, you know, I was playing bass with them. You know, Fred Thomas would be going out with James Brown, and when he was out with James Brown, I was in the churches with them playing bass, you know. You know, Lee Fields I've been recording with since I was 20 years old. You know, I've been recording with him for 15 years. I met him before Sharon, you know, and I met Sharon 14 years ago or something, you know. These are all people we've worked with for a long time, you know. And I think there's a mutual respect there, and a shared passion for good music, you know, that keeps the whole thing together, you know. I mean, it's really the biggest resource we have, the biggest resource I have personally, is just these incredible people that we've been able to gather and work with, you know, and not just these singers, and you know, and not just Naomi and Lee Fields and Cliff Driver and Sharon and these people, you know, Charles Bradley, but also just the musicians, you know, Homer Steinweiss playing drums and Dave Guy playing trumpet and Binky Griptite playing guitar, and you know, and on, you know, even the Budos band and you know, the Sugerman Three, all these different artists that are part of the Daptone family. I mean, every person in there is irreplaceable. You know, I mean, these are the people that really make a record. You know, and I mean, it's just amazing to have everybody together doing that. Because if you made a Sharon Jones record without Homer Steinweiss, it wouldn't be a Dap-Kings record. It just wouldn't be, you know. And if you made it without Neal Sugerman playing the saxophone, just wouldn't sound the same. The sound is created by all these people, you know, and it's really something I feel very fortunate to have met these people and to be able to work with these people on an ongoing basis, you know. And also I feel fortunate to be able to you know, at this point have a sustainable business that helps all these people and supports all these people, you know, because these are really great, talented, passionate musicians, you know, and singers. Naomi Shelton, you know, is a great singer, a great gospel singer. Her and Cliff Driver is her music director, the piano player. You interviewed him, right? They've got a gospel group, the Gospel Queens, and they play in churches and stuff. They do gospel shows and stuff, you know, a lot of weekends and things. And years ago, Fred Thomas was playing bass with him, James Brown's bass player. And but he was also touring with James Brown. So when James Brown would go on tour, Fred Thomas would leave, and Cliff would call me, and I would go in there and I'd play bass, you know, with them in the churches, you know. And it was great. I always loved doing that. You know, I hope I have the chance to do it again, you know, soon. But you know, playing with Cliff and Naomi in the churches and stuff it's just a great experience musically. It's just a lot of fun, and it's you know, it's the same thing you're talking about as far as that kind of spiritual connection with the audience. You know, being able to, you know, play in a church sometime, you go doom 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 doom, and the whole crowd's getting, you know, the whole church is getting worked up. You know, it's a great experience, man. And hearing Naomi and the Queens, you know, just wailing and wailing, you know, that kind of music. It's nice, you know. But then, you know, unfortunately, when James Brown passed, you know, Fred came back and I lost my gig, you know. But you know, they're playing with us. They're opening tomorrow night at the Apollo, Cliff Driver and Naomi.
So. We'd love to see that. Also, I did have opportunity to film because we had 2 dates and we missed it. Unfortunately, we wanted to go to the what is it called?
To the Fat Cat last night.
Exactly,
yeah, they were there last night.
Same night we had to go to. We had another thing at St. Nick's in the jazz pub to film there. How did you start playing music? Like, I would consider you probably more like being the age or like a Led Zeppelin fan, like another
Led Zeppelin fan, really?
American kids, I think, constantly run into Led Zeppelin fans. How did you come up with the soul music?
Oh, well, I mean, I was listening to Led Zeppelin, and then I thought, no. I mean, I was a Led Zeppelin fan probably when I was, you know, 13 or 15 or something. When I was a kid, my parents listened to a lot of oldies. You know, my parents were old hippies. You know, they were into the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and also Motown and Aretha Franklin and James Brown and that music. All the 60s music they were real into. And I guess I was probably I don't know. I was probably 12 or 13 or something. I got into blues records, and I started buying blues records, and something about them I loved at the time. You know, and this is in the in the early 80s probably, when music was very polished and very produced. And to me, I just couldn't find anything better than these really raw blues records. And you know, the more raw and fucked up they were, the better. The more I liked them. You know, even as a kid, it was strange. But you know, these records with just a guy and a guitar just singing. You know, and those kind of records. And I got real into blues records. And then when I got a little bit older, when I was about 17, I came to New York and visited my sister who was going to school here. And a friend of hers turned me on to made me a cassette tape of a bunch of James Brown productions, you know, like the JBs and Marva Whitney and all this kind of stuff, and also the Meters, you know, made me a tape of the Meters, and that was probably in the 1989 or 90 or something like. It was probably 1990 or something, I think, and I got real into that, you know. I mean, I'd known James Brown, and I'd have some, you know, funkadelic albums and things like that, but it was really around then when I really got into that sound, you know, that real hard, raw kind of 60s sound. I got real into those funk records then, and into, you know, I moved to New York a couple years later, I met a guy named Philip Lehman, and we started a record company together called Desco, and you know, through reissues and compilations, and then meeting him, and I started buying more and more records and getting really into these old 45s, all these raw funk 45s and soul 45s and stuff. And we got real heavy into that, and that was kind of when we started making records with Desco, you know. And then over the past 10, 15 years, you know, it started with that, but I got more into all kinds of soul music and African music, you know, into you know, Fela music, Afrobeat from Nigeria, into music from South Africa, into Ethiopian music, into and real into gospel music, you know, partly from meeting Naomi and Cliff, and partly just naturally from listening to rhythm and blues. You get into gospel music, and I got real into the Soul Stirrers and you know, the Swan Silvertones and these kind of quartet groups, those kind of sounds, you know, and also more and more, you know, the more and more I got into this stuff, the more and more I was able to appreciate Ray Charles and Bobby Bland and Tina Turner and all the Stax artists, you know, and Otis Redding and, you know, even James Brown and stuff. I found a new appreciation for that, you know, and you know, it just came from me and Neal Sugerman and all the guys in the bands, you know, spending years on the roads together, you know, driving around in a van from one town to another, you know, going from Ann Arbor to Madison to, you know, to wherever, you know, Rochester, driving and touring, and in the band's listening to all this music, you know, oh, check this out, oh, that's nothing, check this out, you know, hear that, oh, they ripped that out from this guy, you know, and just getting deeper and deeper into that music, you know, just, you know, it's just something I love, you know, and man, if I wasn't making soul music, I wouldn't be making music at all. It's the only thing I really, you know, want to do musically, you know, I mean, it's not like, for us, for Daptone, we never made any kind of business choice to make this kind of music. It wasn't like, well, we should make records. What kind of records do you want to make? You know, I mean, there's only one kind of music that we wanted to make. We wanted to make soulful music. We wanted to make real music. We wanted to make raw music, you know, and we wanted to make the kind of records that we love, you know, and if we were selling them or if nobody was buying them, you know, if we went out of business, whatever, it wasn't going to change anything, and we're always making records the same way, you know.
Like, how do you have an explanation for the British appreciation for soul, like Northern soul? Is that the term that?
You know, I would say that the short answer is I have no explanation for the British. I have no idea what's going on over there, man. I never understand it. We've been going there for years, you know, and Britain was our you know, in 1999, Britain was our biggest market. You know, we went over there and we saw, you know, we did a tour there selling out clubs, you know, 10 years ago, you know, 12 years ago or whatever it was. And I think the reason was that they had this very heavy kind of DJ scene, you know, of Northern Soul, you know, there's the Northern Soul music, and after that, acid jazz and deep funk and, you know, all this stuff, Keb Darge and some really influential DJs over there. But the context they have for rhythm and blues music is very strange to an American, I think. You know, I mean, the way that they hear it and the way they categorize it, you know, this is modern soul, this is northern, this is, you know, deep soul, this is, you know, this is, I say, oh, it's disco, that's not disco, that's modern soul, you know, and like, oh, okay, you know, I mean, they have this very strange kind of categories of music and the way that they hear music because of their history of it. I mean, I think the great thing is that they've appreciated, you know, soul music for so long, even in the 60s, that they were bringing, you know, Major Lance and Sam and Dave over there to do these shows, and they had these soul all-nighters in Manchester and, you know, all in the north of England and stuff. But it's strange to our ears, you know. And when you go there and you go to a club, the DJ's playing all fast songs. Bah, bah, bah. They're all playing all fast songs. Everybody's dancing by themselves. They're doing these kind of very strange dances for the, you know, it's very strange looking dances to our eyes, you know what I mean? And their feet are moving real fast and they're kind of going like this. It's like, what, you know? And, you know, Americans are, you know, different. We like fast records, but we also like slow records. You know, I mean, the slow records is the one that, you know, if you're going to take a girl home, it's going to be to a slow record in America, not a fast record. So the DJ better have some slow records too, you know, and medium songs and stuff. And, you know, men and women dance together over here. They don't really do that over there. It's everybody's kind of every man for himself on that scene, you know, and they're all moving their feet really fast, and they're into, it's almost like tap dancing or something, you know. It's real strange, you know. They've got this kind of jazz dancing thing, you know. But, you know, I think it's great. I mean, they really support the music. They have good musicians. They got good DJs, and, you know, it's just it's just interesting. I mean, it's always like that, going anywhere, going to France or going to Germany or whatever, that people have their own perspective on soul music, subject to the way that they were introduced to it, the way that it was portrayed, the way it was around them, whether it was on the radio or not, whether it's still on the radio, So, I mean, like in France, for example, people love James Brown. I mean, they just love James Brown to their hearts, And I don't think that's the same even in Belgium or someplace. I mean, not that they don't love James Brown, but not the same way the French do, you know what I mean? Or in Spain, their relationship to soul music is more about these kind of garage soul groups, these almost more rock kind of garage groups, kind of guitar groups. Everybody has their own perspective on it, And it's the same thing here. It's regional, The way that people hear music in L.A. is different from the way they hear it in Brooklyn. And it's different in New Orleans than it was in Detroit, and it's always been that way. And that's been one of the great things about music, is these regional sounds, You hear a record and you say, oh, that sounds like New Orleans, or that record sounds like Philadelphia,
You just said you spoke about France. One of your, I think the album before 100 Days, 100 Nights was also released, I think, on a French label. Is that true?
Only in Europe it was, but it was our label. It's released on Daptone. There was a little bit of misbranding on it. It was distributed by a French label. It was licensed for them to distribute it, and there were problems with that. They screwed up the cover art, and then they made it seem like it came out on their label. It's not really. They were distributing the record, really, But anyway, we stopped. Now the records we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing those licenses over there. We're just working directly with distributors and just shipping the records over. So they're all Daptone records. Every one of them.
Another reason why people love the French so much.
Because they work on French, and they change our designs also.
Really, it's very, very frustrating. Very frustrating.
In Trinidad, they have a saying: instead of kiss my ass, go to France.
Like you just said, the regional differences, like in soul music in the 60s, this was very strong. I think, and maybe I would like to ask you for your opinion about first of all Detroit. That's the most famous one. What is the Detroit sound? What is it like?
Well, Motown. Detroit. What they were doing at Motown, I don't think has ever been done before or since. Motown was really a hit factory. In the way that I don't think anybody ever else had a hit factory the way that they did. They had, obviously Berry Gordy at the helm, but they had Smokey Robinson, who was, it's really hard to contemplate how prolific Smokey Robinson was. Smokey Robinson wrote thousands of songs, and you hear, some incredible Temptation song or some incredible Marvelette song, or a Marvin Gaye song or something. You look underneath it, man, you see William Robinson. Smokey was writing for everybody, And then later you had Holland Dozier Holland, So they had these staff writers and staff arrangers, and staff producers and staff engineers, and they had these studios, and they would just book these sessions, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. They had they had the house band, they had these musicians, and they were just rolling them out, as quick as they could make them. They were selling them, they were just cutting them themselves and putting them out, and they sold a lot of records. They sold a lot of records, and it's very different from Stax was a different kind of animal. Stax was smaller, and I think Stax was more family related in some ways, and I think for Daptone, it's business-wise, I think it's more of an inspiration for us the way that they were doing stuff. It's just a little smaller and rawer and stuff. Motown was very, very pop. They were selling millions and millions of records. These Supremes records and stuff like that. They were just selling millions of records, and they were unstoppable. I don't think there's ever been a label like Motown. And that sound, their echo chamber and the tambourines and the stomping, and the sound of James Jamerson and Pistol Pete and these guys on the record. It was very distinct, man. Nobody made records that sounded like that. People tried. When you find a record that's not on Motown and it sounds like Motown, it's usually from Detroit, and it's usually because those guys took off in the evening and secretly did another session. It was really a sound inherent to that family of people. I think that's the great thing with some of these labels, you know, and some of these regional music scenes, you know, whether it's Detroit or Philadelphia or Memphis or New Orleans, you know, or Chicago. You know, these places had they really had a sound to them. You know, people who living in a certain place, living together, and hearing music a certain way. You know, working together for a long time, they developed a sound. You know, and that was one of the things for Daptone that was really important for us, for Neal and myself, was we wanted to have a label that had a sound. You know, so that, you know, now people who love the label, people who are real fans of the label, we put out a record, we put out a new 45, you know, and they're not, well, what's that? What does that sound like? I'm wondering if they know they want it. You know, I mean, they want it before they even hear it. They know they want it because they like the whole sound of the label. You know, the label has you know, they know we're not going to put something out that doesn't feel like a Daptone record. You know, and we have a lot of records that we never put out. We have, you know, I don't know if you guys were at the studio or not, but we got walls and walls of tapes of songs and 45s, albums that were never released, you know, because they were good, but they weren't great. You know what I mean? They were silver, but they weren't Daptone gold. You know what I mean? So we leave them on the shelf. You know, we just keep working. You know, and we don't put out a lot of records, only a couple, 2, 3 albums a year. But you know, for us, it's important to try to keep a high standard. You know, we couldn't compete with, you know, Motown. Or, you know, those guys put out a lot of records, man. They really put out a lot of records.
Like before, asking you for comments on 2 or 3 other ones, like Motown, they were often also criticized for like taking the rawness that was within soul to the middle class, to the white, to the pop, and like a way of also a sellout of the African American experience. Do you see that?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't see it that way. I mean, the thing is, on some level, these are academic points. You know, years later, you can look back at these things and say, oh, well, you know, what was this demographic, and, you know, who was being sold what, and yeah, I mean, it was a pop label, and they were trying to cross over. You know, they were trying, you know, especially with groups like the Supremes and stuff, they were trying to be able to connect to a white audience and to try to get on pop radio. But I don't know if that's selling out. I mean, you have, you know, African American singers, African American musicians, producers, songwriters. You know, you have African American people, you know, owning and running a business and putting that together, and going out there and selling millions of records. I mean, and I think great records. You know, you listen to those records and they're amazing. You know, I listen to those records and I don't think, oh, they really sold out with that one. You know, it's definitely more polished. It's more pop than Stax or something like that. But they're great songs. They're really incredible songs, and the performances are great, and the engineering is great, and the singers are great. You know, the whole thing was great. You know, so I mean, I wouldn't really see it that way. I think that it's probably fair to say that they were intentionally trying to sell records, and they were pop, and they were trying to cross over and stuff. But I mean, I think anybody that's helping, you know, more people hear better music, you know, that's a good thing. You know.
Can I give you like some names?
Well, Martha Reeves, I mean, I mean, that's still with the Motown sound, really. You know. Yeah, I don't have a lot of Martha Reeves records.
When you think about Martha Reeves?
I would say probably Dancing in the Street or something like that, you know. I don't know. Martha Reeves is you know, she's a great singer, great Motown artist. I don't think she's, well, I mean, I wouldn't want to be unfair to her, but I would say I don't think she's quite as prolific as, you know, Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, the Temptations, or you know, even the Marvelettes or something like that, or Gladys Knight. You know, I think I'm a huge fan of Gladys Knight. You know, lately I've been getting real into Gladys Knight. You know, I mean, that's the thing with Motown. Like I was saying, they made so many records that you could be a Motown fan for 20 years, and somebody said, "Hey, have you ever heard this Gladys Knight song?" I said, "No, I never heard that. Here's an album you never heard before." You know, I mean, they put out so much great music. You know.
Chicago, Curtis Mayfield.
You know, Chicago is interesting because I think Chicago, similar to maybe LA, but well, Chicago's kind of unique in this way, but Chicago is a scene of people that came almost exclusively from the South. You know what I mean? If you look at who are the big names in Chicago, or the great names, you know, you look at B.B. King, or Curtis Mayfield, or Bobby Womack, or you know, whatever, Lou Rawls or Bobby Blue Bland, Syl Johnson, all these artists that were big Chicago names, they all came from the South. They're all coming from Mississippi and from Memphis. You know, they're all coming from the South, and Chicago was a place where they did business, really. You know what I mean? Chicago was kind of this business hub. I mean, it's like New York. Like, you know, everybody's from here, but nobody's from here. You know, everybody came from someplace else to get here. You know, so there's a heavy scene in Chicago, especially as far as blues music. You know, Chicago had the kind of really the blues roots. You know, so I think a lot of great records were recorded there. A lot of great records came out of there. But you know, the Impressions or any of these great Chicago groups, none of them are really from Chicago. Originally, most of them were in the South, and most of them were playing gospel or, you know, or blues, and they kind of worked their way out there, you know.
The Motown artist Stevie Wonder, is there somebody you like?
Yeah, I love Stevie Wonder, man. Stevie Wonder, I think I think he's one of the most unique artists in. I mean, it's not a great word, but there's really nobody like Stevie Wonder. The way he writes a song, the way he plays a song, the way he sings a song is very distinct. I mean, the second you hear a Stevie Wonder song, you know it's a Stevie Wonder song. And my favorite Stevie Wonder stuff is the stuff he did on Motown in the kind of the second half of the 60s. You know, the For Once in My Life album, I think is my favorite Stevie Wonder album. But also the other one. What's the one where he's sitting on the stoop and he's got, what's that song on there? Hello, oh man, I can't think of the song. But I mean, I love that era of Stevie Wonder is my favorite. Once you got into the 70s, like in the mid 70s, you know, Motown moved out to LA, and you know, things started getting weird. The Secret Life of Plants and stuff. A lot of people are real into that stuff. For me, that personally is not my favorite stuff. I was more into, you know, into the real, you know, the stompers that he was doing in the 60s. But I think the interesting thing about Stevie Wonder, to me, and again, I think Stevie Wonder was a genius, or is a genius, and I think his music is incredible. He's one of my favorite artists, really. I love Stevie Wonder songs. And you hear these records. He's an unbelievably talented musician, songwriter, singer. I love Stevie Wonder. That said, I think Stevie Wonder is the single worst influence on soul music. I think so many people listen to Stevie Wonder and hear the way he sings and the way that he moves through these kind of jazz chords, and they take away from it this really affected way of singing. This stuff you hear in modern R&B, it sounds almost like Middle Eastern music, you know, where it's just all this kind of affected ornamental singing stuff. When Stevie did it, it was original and it felt very soulful. But man, when I turn on the radio and I hear that stuff, it just sounds awful. And I think a lot of those modern singers are really influenced by Stevie Wonder somehow. You know, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if there's a lot, but I think there's a handful of really great musicians, groundbreaking musicians like John Coltrane, for example, or Miles Davis or something. These people that did something very unique and they had their own sound, you know, and when they did it, it was new and fresh and beautiful. But 30, 40 years later, when people are still trying to copy it, just doesn't sound good. People trying to do that, you know, it sounds very affected. It sounds artificial to me, you know. And I think Stevie Wonder was like that. I think Stevie Wonder had such a unique sound and was so strong as an artist that his influence actually, I think, maybe wasn't a great thing for the music industry. I think there's a lot of modern R&B singers, I wish they never would have heard Stevie Wonder. I wish, you know what I mean? I wish they could just sing a melody, sing a song, but, you know, they try to do what Stevie did, and you can't do what Stevie did, man. That was Stevie, you know?
In Germany, all the young girls try to sing like Whitney Houston or something.
You know?
Like you just said, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, who's also been working a little bit on jazz music, and about jazz, hipster comes to my mind. Also a word that I read in context of you.
Really?
Yes, the hipsters from Brooklyn. Do you see yourself like in this hipster tradition?
Man, you know, no, man. Not at all. Not at all. I don't see myself as a hipster or a hipster tradition. I mean, you know, I'm a father, you know. I'm a husband. I've always been kind of, you know, nerdy kid, man. You know, never been a hipster, man. But you know, I'll take it, whatever. If hipsters are gonna buy our records, man, you know, I'm happy they listen to it. I'm happy they enjoy it. You know, there's something. I mean, there's something hip about Daptone because it is very independent. You know, I think that's the thing that appeals, not just to hipsters, but to people that are listening to like punk rock music, for example. You know, Daptone as a label, you know, as a, you know, philosophy-wise, is very punk rock. Very punk rock. It's very anti-establishment, very much, very independently minded, very much about doing stuff on our own terms. And I think that appeals to the nature of people that are into punk rock, or people that are hipsters, or people that are political, or people that are, you know, have any kind of you know, kind of fresh revolutionary kind of attitude. That's gonna appeal to them. You know, they make a connection to that. You know, it's nice. You know, I mean, there is something innately political about it. You know what I mean? About rejecting the status quo, and about rejecting what major corporations and major media machines are pushing, and about getting all that and rejecting it, not just musically but business-wise, and saying, well, that's not how we're going to treat our artists. You know, we're going to share profits with our artists. We're going to have a record label that's owned by artists. We're going to have a record label, you know, where we're respecting the artist. The music's going to come first, and we're going to sell stuff based on connecting to our listeners. You know, making music for our fans and with our fans, and you know, and everything else is peripheral. You know, and that kind of connection, and you know, in these times it's revolutionary. I think, you know, I mean, in these times when there's so much overproduced, over-manufactured, over-marketed, over-packaged music that's just being artificially driven into the marketplace, you know, through radio stations and videos and TV shows and stuff, you know, by these major labels. When things are that artificial and things are that, you know, they're not honest. You know, so for us to make honest records, you know, for us to get in the studio with real musicians and record something real, something that actually happened, the honesty of that, I think, in this environment is political, it's revolutionary or something. And I think that nature to it, that freshness to it, is something that, you know, somehow maybe gets confused with hipness, you know. So, you know, I mean, I'd be happy to be a hipster, man, if they'll take me, you know. But no, you know, what was it Groucho Marx said? I'd never join a club that would have me as a member, you know. So I don't know.
Talking about politics, like the music from the 60s, and also Afrobeat music,
Yeah.
the Daktari, we liked a lot. We listened in the car.
Oh, all right, man.
Yeah. I mean, all of this, or is it? Is it a coincidence that all of that, like the music, happened all along with the civil rights movement, all the decolonialization of African countries? Is there like an expression of that?
No. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a coincidence. I think, I mean, literally, if you want to go literally with it, there are so many great songs that are political in nature, you know, in soul music, not just soul music, you know, in folk music too, you know. You know, Bob Dylan's music, you know, in the 60s, you know, during the civil rights music, is very political and kind of serves as a soundtrack to that. You know, and Sam Cooke was inspired by Bob Dylan when he wrote A Change Is Gonna Come, you know. A Change Is Gonna Come, you know, those types of tunes were really anthems for the civil rights movement. But I think beyond that, even when you listen to Otis Redding or something like that, there is something about that is really tied into what was happening in America at that time, to the civil rights movement. I mean, you look at Stax. Stax was, you know, was racially integrated in a time when that was significant. I mean, to do that now, it doesn't make sense now when somebody says, "Oh, well, it's amazing, you're working with black people." Whatever. Now it doesn't mean anything. But in 1965, you know, that was progressive to have, you know, black executives, you know, and black engineers and black artists and white artists and white musicians, you know, working together. You know, a band like Booker T and the MGs, that was really the heartbeat of Stax and of Memphis and of all that music, you know. I mean, that, you know, you had two black guys and two white guys in a band together. And at the time, I think that was, you know, at that time, in that moment, I think it was very, I think it was very indicative of progress. It was really a sign of where things were going and where people wanted things to go. You know, where a lot of young people, you know, wanted not just music but their whole way of life. They were, you know, people were done with the segregation and the racism that had come before it, and they're ready for that. And I think, especially with Stax, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I think that was huge. I think racial tensions, you know, in Memphis kind of built up at that point, and I think there was probably more friction even within the label. You know, it was I think it was a real hard time, I think, for Stax and for music in general. I think leading up to that, I think there was an unbelievable kind of unprecedented family atmosphere at Stax. You know, this you know, kind of racially integrated label, which, you know, which was, and the point of it, I think the valuable point of it was it wasn't that they were intentionally racially integrated. It wasn't like they said, okay, well, we will have, you know, let's get ourselves a black drummer and a white bass player. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, these were kids, these were friends that were getting together. I mean, just like we are, just like anybody else, that were just getting together trying to make music, you know. And the best people they could find were different colors, you know, the people that they wanted to be with, the people they wanted to hang out with all day, the people they wanted to do business with and make records with were different colors, you know. And that was why it was so significant, because there was nothing forced about it. And I mean, I think that's why, you know, politically it's so relevant, you know. And beyond that, I think the thing that related to the civil rights movement was that the civil rights movement was a people's movement. You know, it was about the common man. It was about the common experience. You know, it wasn't about celebrities and millionaires and, you know, people of note and people of privilege. It was about the common man. It was about, you know, the guy in the street, the guy in the corner, you know, the lady at the hair salon, you know, the guy working in the factory, you know. I mean, in Detroit, you know, the atmosphere of all these guys working in these car factories. I mean, this is where these sounds were coming from. And I think the music played into that, you know, the music of you know, soul music in the 60s, when you listen to Otis Redding, he may be singing about love, but he's singing about it in a way that people can relate to, you know, that you don't have to travel the world and drive a fancy car to understand what he's singing. It was very real and very raw, and something common, something for everybody, you know, something that people could relate to on a human level. And I think that in a way was political. You know, it's political to do that, to kind of transcend pop music in a way to relate to, you know, the common man on the street, you know, to everybody that's out there, you know. So I think that there's definitely a huge connection to the origin of at least, you know, soul music and stuff, and the civil rights movement.
And the Afrobeat, like, how did that hit the U.S.? Was it also in the 60s? Like
the first time or the second time? I mean,
first time.
Afrobeat didn't really hit the U.S. that much the first time. I mean, you know, Fela obviously was a, you know, a great musician. Fela Kuti was studying. I mean, he was into high life music and you know, juju music and stuff, into the Nigerian dance band music at the time. You know, like high life music. Excuse me. Then he went to London, and he studied classical music. He played trumpet, and so he learned a lot about harmony and stuff. It was you know, very influenced by that, you know, arrangement wise and musically. But it wasn't until I think '69 when he came to the States with Culo Lobitos or whatever his band was at the time, when he really, I think, really kind of found his sound. He came to the States and he was listening to blues records. He was listening to James Brown. He's listening to a lot of James Brown. And, you know, he's listening to the kind of soul and funk records that we're talking about from the States. He was listening to that stuff. And then he met Sandra Isidore, who still lives in L.A. She's still around. And she was the one who introduced him to concepts of Pan-Africanism and really got him involved in, in being political and thinking about the rights of people and freedom stuff. And he went back to Africa. Then and that was I guess 1969. And it was really, if you listen to the 69 sessions, you can listen to, there's some rare recordings of stuff Fela did before that, which sounds like high life music. It sounds like, the contemporary dance band music in Lagos at that time, But then you listen to what he recorded in Los Angeles in 69, and it's strange. There's a difference. There's a real difference. You hear the way the saxes are and the way the chords are moving. They're like almost like blues records, you know what I mean? And then he started getting into these syncopations. You start hearing the syncopations he was getting into there. And then when he went back to Africa, and he went back to Lagos, that was when he really, I think, created, I don't think there's any better word for it. He really created Afrobeat. He really forged that sound. He connected everything he heard in America with the African American music he was hearing in America, with the blues music, and definitely with James Brown's music. A lot of it was influenced by James Brown, and what the high life music he'd come up with, as well as some traditional rhythms and percussions and stuff of Nigeria and of Africa. He connected those things together, and with the political concept, with the concept of standing up against the corruption in Nigeria, and in Africa as a whole, and also with the concept of Pan-Africanism, about being a citizen of Africa instead of these kind of colonial divisions, and all of that was mixed in with like I said, these more traditional like Yoruba influences. The pidgin English with Yoruba thrown in, but also a lot of the melodies, da 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 da. These are Yoruba children's songs and things, and a lot of the percussion, the goloji and the things that are happening in the Congos and things like that. A lot of these things were coming from the Yoruba sounds and music. But I think the mistake a lot of people make who don't look deeper into music is whenever they look at anything out of Africa, they assume that is that it's created in a vacuum. That Afrobeat music is something that came out of Nigeria, and that Fela was coming out of traditional African music and traditional Yoruba music and traditional Nigerian music, and that's where that came out of. And then James Brown came and listened to it and was influenced by that. But the truth is that it's been, for many, many decades, music has been migrating, and the diaspora is not just going like this. There's music is going all over the place, slaves were brought to Cuba and brought certain rhythms that were combined with, music of the Tainos and Spanish guitars and stuff. And then you had rumba, and you had, which eventually came to New York and became salsa, But those rhythms and those sounds, they didn't just come out of Africa and land there. They came back from Cuba. Cuban music was very popular, not just in Mexico, but in Africa and stuff too. So you have bands like Orchestra Baobab or something like that, that are playing music that sounds like, it sounds like Latin music sounds like from Cuba. And the thing is, a lot of people's assumptions, that's the original stuff. That's where it was from, and they took it over here. And the thing is, it's always been a conversation music, To say that they took it from Cuba isn't right, but it's also not right to say that Cubans took it from everybody's, music is going back and forth. And artists like Louis Armstrong, and especially James Brown, were huge in Africa, huge. James Brown was huge in Africa. And if you listen to, now there's all these compilations coming out of these kind of West African funk records coming out. And you hear these guys, screaming and trying to play, and you can tell they're copying James Brown stuff. And sometimes they're even playing covers. They're playing, some strange version of Got the Feeling from Ghana or something. But in Africa, especially in West Africa, James Brown was huge. He was huge in the late 60s and the 70s. And that influence is obvious, especially on Fela's music. I think when you hear those guitars, the syncopation of it, the discipline of it is there's something about that is innately African. And when James Brown did it, it was innately African. But it wasn't that because he went to Africa as an ethnomusicologist, with an anthropology professor and analyzed what was happening. It was just the natural migration of music, through, unfortunately, what probably started in America as slave trade, but then spirituals and gospel music and rhythms that came up, and so those things were built up here and they're built up in other places, but there's always been a cross-pollination between those things, so I think that's one of the most interesting things about Fela and James Brown. Usually if you find somebody who's a big Fela fan, they say James Brown ripped it off from Fela. James Brown was over there in 70, I don't know when it was, 74 or something. Fred Thomas was with him, all those guys, the JBs were over there. And they said they came back from there and it really hooked up their stuff. But I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, they said that they were all down hanging out at the shrine with Fela, but they said James Brown didn't go down there, his band. And I think his band did what they were told, James Brown, Fela's band too, both those guys. So I don't know, it's really hard. I hear a pretty natural evolution of James Brown's music, I don't know how much of that he took from Fela. I don't know if he took anything from Fela, actually, to be honest,
The Dap-Kings, you were also choosing Mark Ronson to be the backing band of Amy Winehouse. And first of all, how was that experience?
Oh, it was great. It was fun. I mean, really, that whole Rehab record, the part we did about 6 songs. We did I'm No Good in Rehab and some other ones. I don't remember what the other ones were. But the songs that we did, the 6 songs, I think it took us probably, even with the horns and everything, probably maybe 5 days we worked on that record. So it was a small thing. It was something we did, not real quick, but it was just a few days we worked on it, and it was a lot of fun. It was great. Mark is great to work with, man. He's a really good producer. I think what Mark really brings as a producer is he's able to recognize what different artists can bring to a project. He was able to hear Amy Winehouse and hear what we were doing at Daptone, both musically and even engineering wise. The sounds that we were getting, and put that together and make a pop record. So I think that took some foresight and a little ingenuity and creativity and he's real easy to work with. Mark he knows what he wants, and he brings something in, and we'll work on an arrangement. We'll put something together and we'll start tracking it, and a lot of times it's great, perfect. He loves what we do, and then sometimes he'll say, "Oh, well, can we try it faster? Can we try taking the snare out of the first verse? Can we try?" He'll have a little idea, and we'll do it, and he'll be very happy with it. And we hand him the tapes, and off he goes. We've done a lot of projects with him, so he was easy to work with, and Amy was real easy too. I mean, when we did that record, she'd cut all these songs, just her and acoustic guitar. Try to make it out of Rehab, whatever. It was all just acoustic guitar and her. And but they're good songs. They had good chords and good melodies, and they were, for the most part, pretty simple. It was stuff that we could dig into as a band. So that was good. And then we did some touring with her a little bit in the States, and she was always real easy to work with and respectful and stuff. Real talented.
With that, Amy Winehouse goes directly into the pop charts, and there's probably even no discussion about it. I don't know where the Dap-Kings, I didn't even look chart-wise where you be categorized. Is there still segregation in charts?
Segregation? I think it would be heavy-handed to use the word segregation, because I think that word carries a lot of weight, obviously, with the racial history we have in the States of, so much racism here. Segregation is different. Segregation is, a special water fountain, for African Americans to drink out of. It's not segregation on the charts. It's money. You have major labels with a lot of money paying radio stations. That's it. They just pay. They give them a lot of money and they play the records. It's bribery. It's illegal, but they get away with it. So that's really what happens on the charts. And I don't think that was the only element for Amy Winehouse's success. I think Amy Winehouse's, her record was very fresh sounding to a lot of people's ears. The sound of that record and the way she was singing and the way the band sounds and stuff like that. I think that record really caught on because I think people really dug it. And again, what did the major labels do after that? They said, okay, well, wow, Amy Winehouse just sold a zillion records. She won a Grammy. She's got, this record that, everybody loves this record. We sold it to everybody. So what should we do next? And instead of thinking, well, maybe that record did really well because it sounded different. Maybe because there was something real about it. Maybe because this is somebody who wrote some songs from the heart and it was recorded with some balls and they went out and they did the thing. Instead of seeing that, what they saw was, okay, well, let's try to find another English singer to try to sound exactly like Amy Winehouse and do some kind of retro soul. It's always a formula with them, and none of their other artists ever really kind of peaked the way that Amy Winehouse did. I mean, Duffy and some of these other people did all right, but they, I don't know. It was in some ways it was generated by that. That whole architecture. But when you ask about the charts, it's funny because the new record we just put out 3 weeks ago, I learned the hard way. The week that it sold, it hit the Billboard charts at number 15. It's the number 15 selling album in America, which is unbelievable to me. We never really thought we were going to be able to, chart that way. There's a certain legitimacy to that, to selling that many records, So yeah, we're on the charts now. So you got to watch out.
Chart.
On the pop charts. Yeah, on the pop charts, number 15 on the pop charts. I was in the top. I don't know if it was number 2 or number 4 or something in the R&B charts, but the pop charts, number 15 when it came out, which is, it's crazy, And to me, what that says to me is that I can talk a lot more shit. You know what I mean? Because these major labels are, they're all talking about the sky is falling. They're selling less and less records, and they blame it on everything. They blame it on bootlegging. They blame it on the retail market. They blame it on the economy. The truth is they're just making crappy records, man. They're just not making good records. And whenever they do make good records, it sells real well, The only thing they do is they're relying on this marketing. So to me now, to show that as they're falling apart, we're climbing up, and that we're actually meeting up there on the top of the charts, that's a big sign. That's a sign that that's the writing on the wall. That hopefully that means times are changing. To me, what that means is people are getting sick of that. People are getting sick of those computers and samples and that kind of music. And people are ready for real music. And that even as an independent label, it's Daptone is a small label. It's Neal and I, and then you got Nydia and Kathy and Mikey. That's the label, Wayne Gordon works with us sometimes, And we have a lot of, there's managers and promotion publicists and booking agents, other people that we work with that are part of the family. But as far as the label, it's like 4 or 5 of us in a busted up old house out in Bushwick. And if just us, without any major label support, no major label distribution, no major label promotion, no major label manufacturing, just us, if we can sell a record that's received that well, that many people buy, that's actually number 15 on the charts, that means the possibilities are endless. That means that people out there are hungry for music, and that if we keep making good music and other people keep making good music, that the majors have made themselves obsolete. Their time's over.
And again, is it like you said earlier on, is it like a snake biting in its tail?
Yeah.
Because I think in the 60s, people, or also record labels, they just try to prevent white people from listening black music. And is it like today that they try to prevent listening all people from good music?
I don't think they're trying to prevent. To be fair, I don't think they're trying to prevent people from listening to good music. I think that if they had a choice, if somebody just handed them a piece of paper, is it check A to put out good records and B to put out bad records, I don't think they would check B. I just think that the problem is there was something that started, they were using images to sell records for years, even in the 50s and the 60s. But they kept pushing certain models, certain parts of the music industry, the way that they were marketing records, and albums, and the images and the way they were portraying artists, and the techniques they found for selling more and more records. These things kind of progressed in a way that got out of control for them, And these labels got bigger and bigger and made more and more money. And as the labels got bigger, they had more leverage over the artist. And as they have more leverage over the artist, they can exploit the artist more, and they can make more money for themselves. And as they make more money for themselves, they just build up more fat in the record label, these A&R people and distribution people and vice presidents of this and vice president of that and assistant to the vice president, to the point where you got a few years ago to the point where there's just endless amount of people in the music industry and none of them were doing anything. None of them created anything, you know. I worked for a short period of time, unfortunately, when my first label, you know, after the demise of Disco, really, when that fell apart and I was hurting for money, I was a temp. You know what a temp is? A temp is, it's an office worker, basically, that works for an agency, and if somebody needs you, they just send you out to any office, right? Yeah. So I was working as a temp for an agency in Manhattan, and they would just send me to different jobs, and mostly they would send me to Wall Street, you know, to financial firms or lawyers' office or something, and I'd, you know, answer their phones and type their memos or whatever. And at a pure coincidence, right around that time, they sent me to Sony Distribution, you know, and it was just at the time when my independent label had fallen apart, you know, and not due to people not supporting it, but just problems I had with my partner, you know, and the thing had fallen apart, and I was just really, really down and you know, depressed, and they sent me to work at Sony Distribution, and when I was there, I couldn't believe the way things were running. This is probably 1999, 2000, sometime around there. And I'm at Sony Distribution, and there's just this endless amount of people, this huge office building full of people, and none of them were doing anything. They were all writing memos to each other and having, you know, board meetings and stuff, and they were just talking about promoting these records that none of them really gave a shit about. You know, none of them really believed in these records. But, you know, they'd say, okay, well, we have a new record by so-and-so. Let's sit down and talk about how to market this. Oh, we're really excited about it. We're going to do a video. We're going to do a live thing. And I'd overhear these meetings and say, well, we're going to spend $1 million on this. We're going to spend $1 million on that, you know. $2 million on the video, you know. We're going to give them tour support, you know. And they were talking about all this money they would send. And then the meeting would break up and they'd walk out and I'd hear them straggling. And I heard two guys saying to each other, man, that record's terrible. Like, yeah, it's out of, man, they're playing out of tune. Did you see them live? They sound terrible, you know. I'm not going to say what band it was, you know. But, you know, I mean, the people in it, they didn't have any faith in the music. They didn't have any love in the music. They just wanted to keep their jobs, you know. And the A&R people were the worst. The A&R people were the very worst. You know, the artists and repertoire people. They're supposed to be the people that they're relying on to find new acts, to find new talent and sign things. They are in this precarious situation where if they sign an artist and the artist fails, they get fired. So they didn't really want to sign anybody. They got their corporate credit cards and they go out to see bands all the time and they fly all over the world to check out bands and to have dinner and take bands to dinner and you know, take limousines here and there. They're just out there spending money, but they weren't signing anybody, you know. And when they did sign somebody, they would only try to sign somebody that was exactly like somebody that sold a lot of records, because, you know, it was formulaic, you know, because that's the only way they're going to keep their job. So they had this weird balance of kind of, they're always working on signing somebody. You know, I used to, a good friend of mine actually ended up at A&R Atlantic for a while. That's another story. But, you know, I know a bunch of those people over the years, and during that time it was just unbelievable, the amount of fat that was in the industry, you know, and the people that were working there in distribution, none of them were doing anything, you know. And that's why when the economy got hit, not just the economy, when record sales started going down for them, CD sales started going down for them, the layoffs in the record industry were unbelievable, because all of a sudden when they said, well, wait a second, who don't we need? The answer was, we don't need any of these people, you know. So everybody got laid off. They all got fired. And good riddance to them, man. They weren't doing anything, you know. There's too many people in the world that have a job where they don't do anything. You know, there are people in Wall Street. There are people in the real estate business. There's so many middlemen, you know. There's so many hustlers, so many consultants and managers that don't do anything. That's not to say none of them do anything. You know, we got the greatest manager in the world. He works for his money, and he makes everything happen. Without him, none of this would be possible, you know? Alex Cadman. Yeah, Alex, man, he's unbelievable, you know? I mean, there's a necessity for certain, I mean, you need certain amount of management, administration, bureaucracy stuff, but the record labels have gotten out of control. These major record labels, you know?
One question, concerning Atlantic Records, you just mentioned that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also a big company that blew up and it built itself on soul in the late 50s and early 60s. And had also lawsuits, like Ruth Brown was, I think, suing Atlantic Records, and also got paid after a while, and the Rhythm and Blues Foundation got funded. How do you see like the relation between artist and label, especially Atlantic Records, who like the owners weren't the guys really writing the music, was more like or turned quickly into a couple of things.
Yeah, well, Atlantic Records, you had Ahmet Ertegun and what was the other guy?
Jerry Wexler.
Yeah, and Jerry Wexler. And I think Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Ertegun, I think, are very interesting guys in the music industry. On one hand, you could really see them, you know, maybe Jerry Wexler in particular, I think a lot of people could probably see them as devils, people that exploited people. You know, the guys that ripped off Stax records, the guys that, you know, are fighting with Ruth Brown or anything. Guys that really capitalized on soul music. But on the other hand, I think, to be honest and to be fair about it, these are two guys that really brought rhythm and blues music to the mainstream, you know? I mean, these are the guys that had faith in Ruth Brown and Ray Charles and said, these are records that everybody needs to hear. This is where we're going to put our money. We're going to put our money into these artists, into these rhythm and blues artists. They said Stax, they said Stax, they said that's great music that we could sell a lot of. You know, so there's a certain amount of foresight, you know, and I mean, you talk about A&R, you know, the real artists and repertoire, the idea of really finding artists and stuff. Atlantic were the masters of that. And I say were, because they sure aren't now. But they were the masters of that, you know, and Ahmet Ertegun, I think the thing with Ahmet Ertegun is after Ray Charles left Atlantic, because he got a better deal with ABC or somebody, he left. After he left Atlantic, Ahmet Ertegun, I think, was personally so destroyed by that. It hurt him so much that Ray Charles, the guy who, you know, this genius soul music. I mean, Ahmet Ertegun wrote songs for Ray Charles, even, you know, the Mess Around or something he wrote, you know. I mean, Ahmet Ertegun was really a rhythm and blues fan. I mean, really a guy that loved music, you know, and loved rhythm and blues. After Ray Charles left, he couldn't even mess with it anymore. He didn't even want to touch it. He was so hurt by that. After that, he moved on to rock. You know, you talk about Led Zeppelin and all this stuff. That was because Ahmet Ertegun was just done with it. He couldn't take it anymore, you know. So, I mean, I think the you know, when you look at those guys, you know, to be fair, I don't think you can really cast them, you know, like anybody. Nobody's really a hero or a villain. You know, everybody's floating somewhere in the middle when you look at the whole picture. And those guys, without those guys, I don't know whether Ray Charles would have had the career he had. I don't know if Ruth Brown would have had the career that she had, you know. Lots and lots of great artists, even Stax. I don't know if they would have got as far as they could have without Atlantic. In the end of it, did they rip them off? Yes, they did. You know, Stax got ripped off. Stax got ripped off bad. You know, the artists, the owners, you know, Ruth Brown probably got ripped off. Ray Charles, you know, he moved on. You know, he was able to leverage that and move on. But, you know, so in some ways they ripped off artists, but I don't think they ripped off artists any more than any other record label of their size, you know. I mean, all the major record labels are exploiting artists. They're using their leverage to do that. So it was kind of par for the course, you know.
Gabe, thank you very much. I think we're almost done. One last question I would have is like 5 songs or albums of the 60s that you would recommend to
Oh, all right. 5 great records.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be from the 60s?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Has to be from the 60s. Little Willie John, Talk to Me, for sure. Gladys Knight, Feelin' Bluesy. Albums, not 45s.
Albums or 45s.
The thing is, 45s are okay too?
Yeah.
God, there's a lot of good ones. 5 is hard. 5 is really tight. I think there's got to be some really good pop. I'd say Otis Redding, Dock of the Bay. That's a desert island record right there. 5 records, man. I keep thinking this, yeah, but then no, not that. Wait a second.
Give us more.
It's hard. It's hard. How about I'll throw? Well, Phalo, we know that's 70s.
With 3 we have.
How many did I do? 2?
3.
3. Okay.
That's 9.
Let me give you I'm gonna try to think of a great one. Bought Blues, Percy Mayfield. That's a great record. Bought Blues. Oh, Sam and Dave's first record, on Roulette, not on Stax, on Roulette. That's a great record.
The name is?
I don't know what the album's called. I'm not sure what the album's called. It's on Roulette, Sam and Dave. What about Nightbeat? Sam Cooke, Nightbeat. It's a great record. Really great record. Bobby Bland, Soul of a Man. That's a great record. Right?